Welcome to this lecture about populism. So, as your book had talked about, populism as an ideology emerged in the late 19th century, both in Russia with the Narodniki movement, as well as even in the United States with the People's Party. And this wasn't just a phenomenon that happened in the US as well as Russia. Populism also was present in Latin America, right? Both with, say, for example, Perón and with his rule in Argentina, as well as the pink wave in Latin America, which was synonymous with more left-leaning populist leaders. And we see that in Latin America today as well. And populism is also something that we have recently seen emerge in Europe, right? So we talked just a moment ago about how populism started in Russia, but we see populism emerging throughout Southern Europe, Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, etc., as is evidenced on these on this slide with the share of the vote of populist parties. And the United States has not been a region that has been omitted from this recent populist wave. We can see this with the presidency of Donald Trump, as well as even the candidacy of Bernie Sanders when he was running for president, and even in his more recent actions as a U.S. Senator. So there's three things of populism that we're going to focus on in this lecture that will help you understand what populism is and how it differs from the other ideologies that we've focused on. So one of the core themes of populism, a major one, is the people, right? So I know there's a lot on this slide, but I'm just going to share some more context for you, right? So populism really focuses on the people as being the ultimate source of political power. Now, contrast that with, for example, nationalism, which says that it's the nation that's the source of political power and that politics should be organized in nations. So this is kind of similar, but we're really talking about the people, right? So who exactly are these people? Usually what we're talking about is common people or masses, those who are marginalized by society, kind of left behind. Sometimes the people also, though, has a national character, where the people is synonymous with a cultural or an ethnic or a more exclusionary version of nationalism, right? And so when we're talking about the people, why are the people important? Well, it's because they have certain characteristics that populism argues is sort of at the center of how politics should be structured. So the people, quote unquote, are righteous, they're pure, they're homogenous, which means that they're all the same. They're innocent, they're trustworthy. They're basically the authentic version of the individuals in society, right? That the people's unified and single will is the way that the government and politics should be structured. And we can contrast that with the elite. So populism is very much like an us versus them ideology. Us, the people, per populism, are in opposition to the elite. And the elite are not the good guys in this story. The elites are the bad guys because they exploit the people through the power that they hold, right? So who are the elite? We're really talking about the establishment. There's a political elite, there's an economic elite, and there is a cultural elite, right? So what makes the elites the bad guys? Well, much like the people are seen to be a single homogeneous force that are unified by this like one pure, good, righteous ethnic, or not ethnic, but moral character. Same concept with the elite are also a homogenous body, right? So you have two groups, the people and the elites, but the elites are not like the people because they're corrupt, they're morally debased, they're the enemy of the people, and they're corrupt because they're the ones that hold political power. They don't care about the masses, they don't care about the people. They're only in power to basically help themselves and fellow elites. They manipulate the people and they exercise power in a way that does not have the interests of the quote unquote people at heart, right? So they're deceitful, they're inauthentic. If you've heard some politicians referring to others as being like fake courts, fake parliaments, fake news, that's what we're talking about. You have this nefarious elites who are pulling those levers of government in such a way that the people, the masses, just cannot get ahead. And then you have another core theme, which is populist democracy, right? So if we're talking about the people and that their will is what should govern politics, then the goal of democracy is to try to give that political power as much to the hands of the people as possible, right? Directly, without filters, right? We're talking about things like public referendum versus a representative democracy, right? Having big movements where it's the people, those that pure, homogenous, morally righteous unit who is able to make sure that government and democracy benefits them as opposed to being captured by elites, right? So populist democracy often doesn't trust the kind of established bodies of government because populists think that the government's captured by elites, right? And that's also the idea that democracies, those that have been around for a long time, are really not living up to their democratic standards because they have been captured by elites, and so they're not really benefiting the average person. Now, sometimes, taken to the extreme, this version of populist democracy starts to be more populist and much less democratic. So Viktor Orban is the leader of Hungary, has been for a number of years, and he specifically, like in speeches and such, advocates for a liberal form of democracy, which means that, right, we can't have democracy because democracy has been captured by the elites, so he alone is going to step in and save the people from the elites, and so you're not going to have these checks and balances, you don't need them, right? So taken in one direction, populist democracy can start to look much less like democracy, where you have checks and balances and individual rights are protected, and much more autocratic. And so we have, much like with other ideologies, we've had tensions within them, right? When we talked about nationalism, there's like a political version of nationalism. There is a civic nationalism. There's an ethnic nationalism. We have tensions within populism too. And populism we have seen emerge both on the left, so think Latin America, as well as on the right, think Europe right now, right? Oftentimes populism tends to emerge in periods of economic crisis where things are not going well for people. Who's blamed for that? In some cases, it's immigrants. That's what this right version of populism is, right? That really the problems of society is that it's the immigrants have captured the elites, or the elites are serving the immigrants and not themselves, versus a left version of populism, which would say that it's the economic elites that have captured the country and they're just benefiting themselves. But either way, we tend to see populism emerge in periods of crisis, whether that's economic crisis or where you have maybe more migration happening in a country that coincides with a period of economic crisis as well. Now, I have provided a few slides here that I thought were really interesting from a data collection project called Team Populism. So you can go to this link. This is, as is stated here, a global network of scholars who are dedicated to the scientific study of the causes and consequences of populism. So What is interesting is that this data collection project, Team Populism, has tried to map leaders of countries based on their speeches and what they've said and what they advocate for in this populist dimension that's intersected with like a left-right dimension, right? So you have a populist left, we can see Bernie Sanders appear. You have a populist right, we can see Donald Trump appear. Then you have a non-populist, right, more like conservative leaning set of politicians. And then you have a non-populist, left-leaning or centrist politicians. Right. So when we're talking about left populism in the current iteration of what we're seeing in the world, especially Latin America, it's really class-based, right? It's focused on things like poverty and inequality and promoting job security and who is considered to be the people, right? See how we have overlaps with like nationalism, who's considered to be the nation. Here we also have differences in populism in terms of who's considered to be the quote-unquote people. For left populists, that's anybody who happens to be in the working class and is not part of the economic elite, right? And you can contrast that with right-wing populism, which is much more nationalist, authoritarian, which is what we are definitely seeing throughout Hungary and, for example, even Turkey. And so that's a much more like exclusionary-based version of populism. And that right-wing populism tends to be xenophobic, so it tends to view immigrants as being a threat to the people, right, as opposed to immigrants being a benefit to society because now you have expanded your diversity, you have a bigger workforce, etc. And so you can see how negative views against immigrants, especially Muslims, and various like right populist parties or left populist parties, right, in Europe, how that is an important part of populism today, right? And this is the percentage who have an unfavorable view of Muslims in their country. So finally, if you are interested in where you score your own political views score on this populist dimension, not only like populist, non-populist, but like right, left populist, you can take this quiz from Team Populist. It's at The Guardian. The Guardian is a UK newspaper that teamed up with these researchers to write several stories as well as to support them in their data collection project. So you can take this quiz to find out where on the populist scale you fall.